We have always assumed humanity is progressing, each generation smarter than the last. Technology advancing, modern medicine extending our lives, our minds growing sharper. This is the story we tell ourselves. But one archaeological discovery has been quietly waiting for us for a very long time. The Cro-Magnons excavated in southwestern France lived approximately 30,000 years ago. The average modern human brain volume is 1,350 but their average brain volume is estimated at over 1,500 milliliters, meaning our brains are nearly 10% smaller than our ancestors. This came up in an archaeology lecture, something a professor shared with our class. He said, "In other words, we are in many respects less intelligent than these ancient people." I was the oldest student in the room, sitting among classmates who were 19 and 20 years old. And after he said that, the entire classroom went silent for a moment. Then someone laughed and said, "Professor, how is that even possible?" Because the idea is absurd. Humanity spent thousands of years building civilization and ended up with smaller brains and lower intelligence. But that is not even the most unsettling part. Cornell University geneticist John Sanford, the inventor of the gene gun, the scientist who transformed the entire field of agricultural genetic engineering while studying the human genome, discovered something. Every generation, humans accumulate approximately 60 to 100 new genetic mutations. The vast majority of these mutations are mildly deleterious. They will not make you sick immediately, but slowly, quietly. They erode the precision of the genome. He called this phenomenon genetic entropy. Entropy is the physics principle describing the constant increase of disorder. The universe's default direction is from order toward chaos, from precision toward decay. Sanford says the human genome is traveling the same road. We are not evolving. We are devolving. Perhaps even collapsing. Then there is language. People tend to assume modern languages represent the pinnacle of human linguistic development. After all, we have more vocabulary and more ways of expression than ever before. But after linguists studied ancient Sanskrit and classical Greek, they found that the grammatical structures of those languages were far more intricate and precise than any modern language. These were not the languages of primitive people. They were highly exact systems. And it is the languages that came afterward that have been slowly simplifying. When we place these three threads together, shrinking brain volume, continuously degrading genome, simplifying language, they all point in the same direction. Humanity is not progressing. It is in decline. So the question becomes, if this is where we are now, what was the starting point? Genesis says the first man was named Adam. The first thing he did was name every animal. The father of modern linguistics, Chomsky, said that humanity's language capacity appeared in the brain like a sudden hardware installation. It did not arrive through slow evolution. It functions like a system that was placed there, fully operational from the beginning. That man standing in the Garden of Eden, looking at each creature, able to observe its characteristics, grasp its essence, and assign it a precise name, what would his genome have looked like? How large would his brain have been? The answer comes in the next part. But first I want to tell you about a secret hidden inside the name. Adam itself, a secret about a connection between him and this earth that runs far deeper than we have ever imagined. Adam, in Hebrew, it is not simply a name. The root of Adam is the same word as the earth, Adam, and at a deeper layer, it shares the same origin as the words for red and blood. So Adam's very existence, beginning with his name, was already a declaration. He was the blood-colored earth, or put another way, living soil. Adam did not merely live on the land. He and the land were connected at the level of their nature. Genesis describes Adam's task in the Garden of Eden using two Hebrew words, abad and shem. To tend and to keep, that is the translation most of us encounter. But abad appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, with the same word used to describe the work of priests serving God inside the temple. And shamar means to guard, to watch over, To protect, the same word used to describe the Levites who kept watch over the Ark of the Covenant. So Adam's original role in the garden was not that of a gardener, it was closer to that of a priest, serving inside a sanctuary, protecting a sacred order. And yet, he failed. Genesis says that in that moment, even the ground itself was cursed. Cursed is the ground because of you. Notice that detail. Not you will suffer, but the ground, because of you, is cursed. The man whose nature was bound to the earth. The moment his internal order collapsed, the external ecosystem collapsed with him. Plants began producing thorns and thistles, not for beauty, but for defense, for competition. The ecosystem switching from a mode of cooperation into a mode of survival and rivalry. There is a law in physics called the second law of thermodynamics. In any closed system, without outside intervention, disorder can only increase, never decrease. That law has been at work in our history from the very beginning, from that first garden until now. Back to the data. Sanford's genetic entropy research tracked the rate at which mutations accumulate. His conclusion was this: if you reverse that rate backward, the original human genome must have been an extraordinarily precise, nearly flawless original version. Another scientist, Michael Lynch, published research in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, indicating that as natural selection pressure decreases in modern society, harmful mutations that would once have been eliminated by the environment are quietly persisting, silently accumulating in the human gene pool. Dr. Lynch concluded that our rate of mutation accumulation is accelerating, that human intelligence and physical constitution will show measurable decline in the foreseeable future. The irony is striking. While we worry about artificial intelligence advancing without limit, the research data is telling us that human beings are accelerating in the opposite direction. Then there is lifespan. Genesis records that Adam lived 930 years, and his son Seth, 912. It was only after the flood that lifespans began to drop off a cliff. When modern scientists study cellular lifespan, they discovered a structure called the telomere, a protective cap at the end of each chromosome that shortens slightly with every cell division. And when it reaches its end, the cell DS, the length of the telomere, determines how long a cell can live. If the original human genome was that untouched, undamaged original version, what would the starting length of his telomeres have looked like? In that garden that was first called Eden, Adam, a being whose brain capacity likely far exceeded ours, whose command of language was extraordinary, whose genome carried almost no errors or mutations, who was connected to the entire Earth at the level of his nature. The truth may well be that he looked nothing like the cartoon caveman we picture, dressed in leaves and carrying a stone axe. He was something we can barely imagine. Consider the pyramids and megalithic structures scattered across the entire world, engineering left behind by people hundreds of generations before us. And we are simply a much later, far more worn-down version of Adam. How much do you think we have lost? And yet what set all of this collapse in motion was not Adam's decision alone. In that garden there was another presence, a presence that could speak, that radiated light. Every civilization across the entire world remembers it, fears it, and yet worships it. That presence, which feels both utterly strange and deeply familiar to all of humanity. As scripture says, a little leaven works through the whole batch of dough. If you find yourself drawn to searching for small truths in the long river of history, subscribe and join us for the next episode.